committee meeting. Item number 1, apologies and changes in membership. So we have an apology from Councillor Love. We have an apology from Councillor Lever, who's running late but should be here. There's currently a vacancy on the committee after the retirement of Councillor Ellis. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of October. Is everyone happy that they're a true record of that meeting? Do I have a proposer? Councillor Quirk. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cook. All those in favour? In which case, an abstention. Fine, thank you. In which case, I will sign those. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any? No. Councillor Quirk.
As we're talking about budget issues, the monitoring officer would normally give us a blanket exemption. Maybe we'd ask him to do that.
I'm just waiting for the hopefully the mic does work. Right, hopefully you can hear me now. Sorry, the query was about general disposition, was in relation to budget matters. Yes, I'm happy to confirm there is a general disposition in force. It was granted in 2022 for a 4-year period, the maximum. It relates to any disclosure of pecuniary interests, so it allows members to talk about budget matters and involved in budget setting and council tax setting, even if they have a disclosure of pecuniary interest. It only relates to disclosure of pecuniary interests. It doesn't relate to any other prejudicial interests which you might have. So obviously you'd have to bear that in mind. But the short point is, yes, one is in force and in place for a 4-year period from 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 4, public question time. There's no one coming forward in the public gallery, and I don't think we have any written questions that were submitted in time. So there appear to be none. Item 5, progress updates. Page number 9, I think. There's only one update I've been given in relation to this, and that is the outstanding request on the 7th of February that councillors Quigley, Robertson, that's me, and Quirk be permitted to see the outcome of the floating bridge settlement. Councillor Quigley since revealed that even when he signed that request, he'd already seen it, which I don't quite understand why he signed a request in the first place. Anyway, the leader has confirmed he's not prepared to show that settlement to anyone other than Councillor Quigley. I think it's disappointing it's taken 9 months to report on that, and a disappointing decision. And people have to draw their own conclusions as to why only Councillor Quigley is allowed to see it. But that matter is therefore technically closed as far as this committee is concerned. I have nothing else to report on progress, unless anyone can see anything outstanding. I think all the items are for a future update. Item 6, committee's work plan, the forward plan and the work programme, so pages 11 to 30. So in terms of next meeting, we have 2 items, and there are a couple I wanted to add to it if the committee is happy. There's a future governance review for this council taking place, I think broadly looking into whether a committee structure is preferred. That seems to be moving at a pace, so I suggest we put that on the January agenda for this Scrutiny Committee to have a look at that report prior to it going off to, I guess, Cabinet and full council, certainly. Are we happy with that, to put that on the January agenda? And following a meeting of chairs of Scrutiny Committee, I think last week, informal meeting where we discussed flooding, I think all scrutiny chairs are in agreement that flood response needs looking at in terms of both the council's response and so far as we're able to look around some of the issues of Southern Water, Environment Agency and Island Roads so far as we're able. And the best way of dealing with that would be through corporate scrutiny, to formally ask those agencies to attend this meeting in January, and to ask them to attend an informal meeting before then, so in December. That request has started to be made through James Brewer at this council. Is the committee happy that we put flooding on our January agenda? Fine, okay. Yeah. Leader.
If I may, I don't interpose on your committee and what you choose to do, but there will be a Schedule 19 report on the flooding. I would ask you to bear in mind that you may be asking the same people who will be contributing to that report to come and declare information publicly before the report's even completed. I would just ask you just to consider that very carefully.
Thank you, Councillor Jordan. I think the rationale behind this was that the Section 19 reports last time, 2 years ago, took 9 months. And while a lot of good work takes place to produce them, 9 months of silence would not be, I think, acceptable to this committee or the public. And there must be some interim answers that can be given. I hear through the MP, Bob Seeley, publicly that the Environment Agency is supposed to be giving an update tomorrow, possibly to him and the council. So there will be some information, I think, in front of us that the committee should be able to look at. But I am mindful there will be a statutory investigation going along at the same time. Thank you. Councillor Quirk.
For the November meeting, we've got the amalgamation of Chillerton and Rookley Primary School with God's Hill Primary School. We've got a decision being made. Would it be possible for that meeting to have the criteria against which the decision is being made? We have to have sort of some thoughts about what will be a good or a bad outcome, and it would be very useful to have that for the meeting of scrutiny.
Yeah, is that sort of a question, is it, Councillor Quirk, rather than a matter for the agenda? Okay, yeah. And I think if you wanted a reaction to that, we can do it in questions, members' questions. Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have anything in relation to the forward plan and the work plan? Councillor Cook.
Thanks. Given that the Levelling Up Bill was recently been granted royal assent, I was wondering if if you had a chance to assess any of the implications of that, and will there? I believe at the last meeting we were going to be invited to the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Neighbourhoods to discuss it in more detail. Is that still likely to take place, that discussion there, and will the draft IPS like to be delayed because of the Levelling Up Bill? Thanks.
Yeah, please, Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Simon. With respect to the King's speech today, I think we will all be pleased to hear that the Levelling Up Bill has been agreed. I think one of the things that we are looking for, and I think one of the important aspects for this council, is to see whether the exceptional circumstances aspect for potential development is going to arise anywhere. Now, the guidance that I'm getting from officers is that this is not within the Levelling Up Act. However, there will be a NPPF that will follow. Now, we don't know when this NPPF is going to follow. We don't know whether there's going to be consultation for the NPPF as there was previously. At the moment, the decision's only been made, the announcement's only been made today. And I'm sure that Councillor Jarman probably has more understanding on what's actually within the Levelling Up Act than I do. But certainly the discussions that I've had is that at the moment we don't really know what is, the devil is going to be in the detail, and it's the detail that we will be looking at in the next few weeks. How the Neighbourhoods and Regeneration Committee wants to address this is really a matter for the chairman of that committee. I will give him all the support that he requires, but again, the longer we have on this, the longer we have the officers scrutinising the policies and talking to colleagues on the mainland, the more information we can provide for you guys. At the moment, it's only been discussed today, and although I like to think that I'm very, very, very efficient, even I don't know what's the detail that there is within. So fingers crossed. I'm always hopeful, always optimistic, and hope that there will be something to help the development proceed on the Isle of Wight.
Yeah, thank you. I think bearing in mind the agenda item is work plan and forward plan, that discussion and debate, which is an important one, actually, I would have thought it's very relevant to the IPS meeting that's going to be had by Neighbourhoods and Regen in December. And members can go along, but they've been specifically encouraged to go along if they have interest in that. Yeah, thank you. If there's nothing else, then we will move on. And I probably should have said at the beginning, I've agreed to reorder the agenda slightly and bring item number 11, budget assumptions, up and deal with that now, as Chris Ward and Kerry Hubbleday are here with us. Chris Ward, can I ask you to briefly introduce it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper before you, it gives you the opportunity to get under the bonnet of the council's forecast overall budget deficit, 3-year budget deficit of £6 million. What that does actually is that drives the savings requirement. So you'll know from the budget report clearly that depending on the size of the deficit, that informs what savings need to be found over the course of the next 3 years. So usually the focus around the budget is often on the savings, but not necessarily on the majority of the spending and the funding. So what's provided in the paper, in the appendices, are the key assumptions that underpin all of the council's spending and therefore forecast spending over the next 3 years, but also all of the key assumptions that underpin the funding as well. And as you'll know, we have an overall medium-term financial strategy that essentially says that in-year spending should be matched by in-year funding, because that gives you the equilibrium that you need to be able to demonstrate that you've got a balanced budget over the medium term. Obviously, those assumptions were formulated back in February 23. They may not hold true now. What I've sought to do in the appendices is to give you an indication of which of those assumptions on our current expectations have moved, and the extent to which they've moved, if we know it, and a guide to what the overall financial impact of that may be as we move towards the budget for 24-25. What I should also say is that a number of the movements that are identified in those appendices are actually elaborated on in your QPMR2 report that you have today. So some of the financial pressure that you'll see in there, so you'll be aware that in overall terms, QPMR2 is forecasting a £3.2 million overspend for this financial year. But that comprises actually £10.2 million worth of spending pressures, offset by £3 million in year that this is, offset by £3 million worth of in-year savings, and then further offset or funded, if you like, by £4 million worth of contingencies to leave you with that £3.2 million forecast overspend for the current year. Now, the importance of that is that the £10.2 million worth of spending pressures within that report are likely to continue into 2024-25. And as we haven't accommodated or budgeted for them in the current year, we will not have budgeted for them in future years either. And therefore, it presents an unfunded budget pressure that we will be carrying as we move into the 24-25 budget setting process. In terms of the current year, just to address I think what probably is the obvious question, whilst we have we've accommodated to a large degree the £10.2 million forecast spending pressures and brought it down to a problem of 3.2 million. The obvious question is, if we end up at the end of the year with a £3.2 million problem, how do we resolve that position? The council at this stage, and with a £3.2 million forecast overspend, still holds within its corporate contingency around about £2 million. That's obviously for any further risks that happen during the year, but if no further risks happen, then that contingency is available to offset that. And you will also be aware that the council has general reserves above its minimum level of around about £5 million. So between those two, the contingency and the council's general reserves, it means that the council is able to cope with that position for the current year. Obviously, any spending pressures that we have of that 10.2 million that I mentioned that will have an impact into next year. If we are to move into next year in the same way that we did this year, which was that our spending is broadly matched by our in-year income and funding, i.e. we don't have an underlying budget deficit, then we will have to find a remedy, not just to the £2 million worth of savings that was originally planned for next financial year, but any unfunded budget pressures that arise in the current year. I've sought to explain those in the appendices and give you a scale of that, but that just sets out the position for you in very general terms, in terms of the position we find ourselves moving into next year and what the fundamental underlying assumptions for the 2024-25 budget are as we prepared them in February 23. But obviously, I'm happy to take any questions of explanation or comment that you might have.
Thank you very much. Thank you. But I think it's really helpful to see it set out in that easy to digest way, and help this committee understand the process around budget setting as well. Questions from the committee. Councillor Quirk.
As you put it, we can cover for this year from the reserves, but if we don't start to address it this year and next year, we will be carrying forward a structural deficit. That is not sustainable unless it's matched by money coming in terms of fair funding or something. Would you just like to comment on your hopes, expectations for fair funding?
Well, I don't have any great hopes around fair funding, I have to say, but what I do, it's acknowledged that, a relatively early stage of the budget process. It doesn't sound that far away, but it all happened. There's still a lot to happen between now and February. One of the most significant events will be the autumn statement on the 22nd of November. I am hopeful that there may be additional funding announced around social care. Can't guarantee that, of course, but in terms of the inquiries that central government have been making of local government, they have centred around adult social care, children's social care and homelessness. So I'm hopeful that that will be taken on board by government and we might hear an announcement in the autumn. Of course, what we won't hear as part of the autumn statement is how much of any funding, if there is any, will make its way to the Isle of Wight Council. That won't take place until the local government finance settlement in December. But nevertheless, there's the opportunity for additional funding from the autumn statement. I hold out more hope from that than I do about the Fair Funding Review, which actually we already know has been that has been announced as being something for the next Parliament now, not for the current Parliament. However, that hasn't stopped the council progressing its objectives around the island deal and additional funding. So we've been in a process with the government this year, which ended at around the end of July. At the end of July, where we had to make quite a substantial evidence submission to central government to justify the additional costs, as you're well aware, the additional costs of providing public services in an island context, and those that are unique to the Isle of Wight Council as a direct consequence of being separated from the mainland. We don't yet know what the outcome of that is. We certainly will know as part of the local government finance settlement, which is in December. Whether we'll hear anything before that, I don't know. But we remain hopeful that there will be a positive impact from the work that the council has done in pursuing that. And of course, when we get to January time, that's the time where we are doing, or Kerry and I are doing all of our calculations around how much council tax income do we think will be available to the council and how much business rate income will be available to the council. Many variables associated with that, of course, but the combination of what might arise out of the autumn statement, what might arise out of the local government finance settlement, the level of savings that the council will achieve in the current year, and how organisationally we can seek to bear down on the budget, mitigate or manage any of the cost pressures that the council has. In combination, we are aiming for that to remedy any funding gap that we have, so that we move into next financial year on the same basis that we entered this financial year, which is with our in-year spending broadly matched by our in-year funding. I know that was a long explanation, but it's a multifaceted approach.
Councillor Quirk.
I have several questions. Should I go one at a time and get mine out of the way, or do you want to?
Whatever you think's most efficient.
Well, I think it'd be more efficient if I just asked the question, because it isn't necessarily always to Chris. I'd hope to be able to ask some of the questions to the appropriate members, but I'm sure Chris will actually be able to give me the answers better than the cabinet member probably at this stage. Can you clarify in terms of the Treasury management actions that delivered the £2 million savings, are these a one-off or are they going to be recurring?
Are these the in-year savings that we've put forward in QPMR2? Yeah, well, we can only consider them to be one-off at this stage because they're dependent on two major factors. One is, in the first place, you've got to have the cash balances to invest on the markets. And that's a function of the speed, if you like, at which we receive our income and the speed at which we then pay out our expenses. So as a simple example, you might say, well, okay, we receive our council tax income on a particular day of the month and our salaries go out on a particular day of the month. And if they were the only two variables of the council, in the intervening period where we might have a surplus, we invest it on the money markets. Multiply that up in terms of the £400 million plus transactions that the council has in a year. And we are therefore managing significant cash flows throughout the year. So predicting exactly what your cash flows will be is a dark art. So we would never rely on having surplus cash flows every single day on an ongoing basis. We may, but we have to manage our cash flows on a much more dynamic basis than that. And the second variable is what's going to happen to interest rates, because the higher the interest rates, it's good for councils that have a positive cash flow position, bad for councils that have a negative cash flow position. On the capital side, it's generally relatively neutral because the Isle of Wight Council, like most councils, lock in their borrowing costs on a fixed basis. So what we're really looking at is movements in interest rates and what do our cash balances look like. We can't rely on those positive cash balances forever and a day, so we wouldn't rely on them in the budget preparation process. Another long answer, but apologies.
We're using 2.4, or projecting to use 2.4 million from the contingency reserves. Are there any hidden impacts of that?
The main impact is that one of the contingencies that we're using and that we often talk about is the COVID contingency. You may recall that when we prepared the budget back in February, we said that we had designed that COVID contingency to deal with the legacy impacts of COVID. Those that we felt were obviously additional costs, but had a definite lot, we thought would have a definite life or would tail off over time. The largest element that comes out of that contingency is for social care, and it related to delayed discharge at the time of COVID. Now, we'd anticipated that the financial effects of that would last for 4 years. We're currently in year 2, and we have 2 further years worth of funding available for the continuing impact of the delayed the discharge scheme. So we've got sufficient cover for the following 2 years in the COVID contingency for implications arising out of COVID. So that's the main consequence of drawing down on that funding. The other element that we are using the contingency for in the current year is the pay award. The pay award has been actually agreed just recently. And for the council, that's about an additional £1.6 million worth of cost over and above the budget. Now, we can meet that from the council's contingency in the current year, but we can't meet it from the council's contingency in future years, because as you'll appreciate, that if we were to use £1.6 million of the council's contingency next year, which we know is going to happen, suddenly that contingency is it's not 4 million anymore, which is the core level of the council's contingency. It's now 2.6 million. And that's 2.6 million to cover the same range of risks that we faced in the current year. So utilisation of a contingency for pressures beyond the year in which the contingency is built for is just a recipe for having no contingency whatsoever over time, and therefore having no financial provision for in-year risks that may arise. So they're the main impacts. So the point about that is that we will have to plan in the financial impact of the pay award in future years that has arisen this year, which is over and above the budget.
This one might be a slightly broader response audience. Have we identified any in-year financial mitigation measures to deal with the 3.22 projected revenue budget deficit?
There,
Is there anything happening that can?
there's actually quite a lot happening. And much of the activity is focused where the overspending is occurring, as you would expect. So there is quite a lot of activity in adult social care seeking to manage that particular pressure. Children's services is far more difficult. So the forecast overspending in children's services is largely as a consequence of additional children in care. That's far more difficult. The pressures that we're experiencing in home to school transport, that is far more difficult to deal with because it's largely driven by the number of children that receive education, health and care plans, and then therefore become entitled to home to school transport provision. That is a national problem, just as the children's social care is a national problem and the adult social care is a national problem. But there are measures that are put in place, in particular around adult social care, and there's not much we can do about the pay award, unfortunately. But that's the majority of them, and obviously there's ongoing work around seeking to improve the overall viability of our leisure centres and that. So in the main, it's around adult social care and it's around our leisure centre provision.
This one might be.
Councillor Quirk, I'm just going to quickly see if anyone else wants to ask a question before letting you continue. Is there anyone else on the committee who would like to ask a question? No, in which case, Councillor Quirk, carry on. Can I just ask how many more you have? Okay, all right.
So this one is it's been reported to members unofficially by base operatives that the incinerator, which is a critical part of the Forest Road development, is not or has not been operational, and that as a result, outsourced sorted waste is being recycled secretly and dumped at Robin Hill. Is there any truth in this?
Does that question relate to item 11, Councillor Quirk? Yeah. I don't. Unless anyone wants to field that question, I wonder whether we turn it into a written question. Sorry. Yeah.
Written response?
Yeah. I mean, Colin Rowland's not putting his hand up to field it. Not that I would necessarily expect him to. Question like that, but can we maybe turn that into a written question?
Last question.
Wendy Pereira.
Thank you, Chair. My advice would be that we do turn that into a written question, given that it is based on anecdotal information that's been provided, and it wouldn't be right for us to be in a position to respond to that tonight.
So, Councillor Mosdell's got a hand up. Yeah, fine. Fine. Just on Councillor Quirk's question, could we take that as a written question then, rather than having to repeat it at another point in the meeting? Final question, Councillor Quirk.
Final question was the we've had quite a lot of agreements reached about disposal of sites and income that's sort of coming in from disposing of council sites for redevelopment. Will those, or they don't, nothing appears to be coming in on the income stream from that into the capital. Will it be there, and what will be happening with it?
Yeah, as a matter of course, all what I'd probably describe as corporate capital resources will be taken into account when the council is provided with, as part of the budget proposal that comes to council. It will suggest these are all the new proposed capital investments, and it will identify where all the funding sources have come from. So it will be part of the corporate capital resources available. So you should expect that to come forward.
Thank you. Councillor Mosdale.
Thank you, and it is a budgetary question. I'm assuming we're doing the budgetary assumptions and just going through the actual current state of the budget as well. Having gone through the capital programme forecast on page 141, I read with interest when there was money came from government for refugee housing, but didn't feel that there were that many questions asked at scrutiny at the time. And I do have some now questions, having seen the line on the capital budget. So it says, in regard to refugee housing, 2,179,000, that this will be grant funded scheme with match funding from borrowing. When I read it in the press, I certainly didn't read that there was any match funding for this. So I have a few questions relating to this, because the devil, as Councillor Fuller said earlier, is always in the detail, isn't it? So my first question would be, is where would that match funding coming? Because, you know, I sit and go through budgets and I can't see anywhere where another 2,179,000 is to match fund anything at the moment. So I'd like the answer to that, please. I'd also like to know, it says that a number of properties have been profiled for acquisition in 23-24. I know how long it is till Christmas, and 23 is nearly gone. But also it's a case of how much these properties that have clearly been allocated already, are they being sourced from our already sparse affordable housing allocation? If you're a young family who's been saving up to buy a first property, I think we all hold our heads in shame at how much affordable housing is actually built on this island, truly affordable. So I wouldn't like to think that anything the council was purchasing is coming away from what is that a very small affordable allocation that we have. When these properties become vacant, because hopefully they will become vacant as people return home or anything like that, you know, it's the nature of the beast. They're not houses for life, I assume. What will happen to those properties when they become vacant? Will they be used on the same sort of type of basis as Branston? So Branston's a really good scheme that I think everybody in this chamber could be proud of, because it's gone from different administrations and it's all something that we can say we can all shine a beacon on. But one of those really good things is there is a locality clause in those houses. So some of the ways that you register is your children might go to primary school or you might work in the area. There is that part that there is locality. If those properties become vacant that have been purchased for the refugee housing, will they then have a locality clause on them so they go back to islanders? And also it says that they might be, you know, I was listening to Scrutiny, it says they'd return to a housing company. Well, last thing I checked, we don't have a housing company. Sorry, it's lots of questions, but 2 million is a lot of money just to be a budget line that doesn't seem to have had a lot of questions around it. Thank you.
Can answer the finance part. I can answer the finance part. So, yeah, there's borrowing provision within the capital programme for housing, and that's always been subject to a financial appraisal demonstrating viability. With the refugee housing, we received funding of about 50% of the total cost, grant funding, and that enables the council to borrow the balance without it having any impact on its ongoing revenue account. So the borrowing provision is in the capital programme for housing where the viability can be demonstrated. So that's the financial answer to the question. There's cash within the capital programme for housing, but that is intended to match to, if you like, to reduce the level of borrowing that would be required for an affordable housing, either development or acquisition, but it still needs to meet the viability tests, i.e. that it wouldn't cause a financial burden on the rest of the council's ongoing revenue budget. To date, there's been few opportunities for that, you know, for those criteria to be met. So there is money held there, but it's held on the basis of a viable proposition. I can't talk to the detail of the other questions that you have around what happens when those properties become vacant. And I'm not sure if there's anybody else here that can. Laura?
Laura Gordian, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the properties themselves, we're exploring the purchase of 9 properties. They are for refugee families who are currently resident on the Isle of Wight. They are homes for life, and when they do become vacant, they will be offered to other refugee families. That's the condition of the grant funding that's been made available to the local authority. We're in the process of transacting for 3 of those properties at the moment. The remainder we're working with colleagues in property services to secure. They have come from the general Isle of Wight housing marketplace, as that's the only place the Isle of Wight Council can purchase properties from. We've been very resourceful in terms of identifying properties that perhaps we can purchase that others can't, that may need some work, or that have been identified for other purposes that we can step in and take over the purchase of. So we're trying as best as possible not to destabilise the wider marketplace.
Yes, sorry, can I just clarify the funding for that? Is it all external, all grant funding, or is there some council funding going into the purchase of the properties?
The properties that are currently being purchased are being purchased through the grant funding that's been made available to the local authority.
And the remaining 6 properties, all 9 properties?
Will be through the grant funding that's available to the local authority.
Sorry,
Thank
but
you.
that clarity, that is match funded, isn't it? So it's the part of it is the grant, and the part of the money that the council will be using will be match funded, for what I understand Chris Ward said, from the actual housing stuff in the budget, because this is a viable case. Because the money has come to go to the refugee housing, then it becomes a viable case to take money out to match fund it, hasn't it? Yes. So
Yes.
the answer to the question is no, it's not all coming from the grant, is it? It's half coming from the grant and half of the money is being match funded by the council.
Yes, but it's borrowing from the council because it meets the criteria for viability. It's not cash-backed funding from the council.
Yeah, thank you.
That's clear in my mind. I'm not, but I'm not sure every face is looking. Yeah, so sorry, Wendy Pereira.
If I may, I don't think it's a straight 50-50 split. I think we get more grant and prop it up with less borrowing. So it's not we're not matching 2 million grant with 2 million borrowing. There's not that direct match. And I think as well that even though it's housing for life, if we get to the position where there's no a unit becomes available and there's no offer to be made to a refugee family, it can be used for locally affordable housing provision in the longer term.
Thank you. If we could see the legalities of that have been dealt with, because, you know, we all sit here and we think that, you know, we have the utmost sympathy and think this is a good thing, but actually we have residents on the island who are currently being evicted. I don't think there's a councillor here that doesn't have some of the sort of heart-wrenching stories that we have of people that are losing their homes. So I think we have to make sure that we ask the questions that eventually, if those properties, you know, we do hope that the war ends and those families can return home if they want to, and actually that families on the island have the chance to actually use those properties. It's just making sure that we've ticked all the boxes and make sure that if there is a property for life, that it stays within this council and families on the Isle of Wight. Thank you.
We're still on item 11, budget assumptions. Are there any more questions to Chris Ward? No? In which case, thank you both very, very much indeed. Thank you. Item 7, cyber strategy 2023 to 2030, and that's found on pages 31 to 70. Councillors have had those. Do we have any comments or questions? I mean, my general comment is it's a very comprehensive document. It's obviously got a fairly substantial lifespan through to 2030. which does suggest to me it might be useful to review this again during its life cycle. Maybe in 2 years' time. A nod, at least one nod, a couple of nods. I'm just going to leave it. Councillor Quirk.
Just one observation. On page 42 or page 6 of the actual document, it's the vision and the aim, and it says to achieve a strategy to be significantly prepared against cyber attacks by 2025, with government organisations across the whole public sector being resilient to known vulnerabilities and attack methods no later than 2030. I assume this is probably a nationwide type criteria, but leaving a window of 5 years open to where you are open to cyber attacks doesn't seem the best idea.
Councillor, your assumption is correct. The date is to match the national targets, but I can guarantee that we would not wait to 2030. We are already working. There is already an action plan that CMT have seen that aligns itself to the cyber strategy draft. So there are activities already commencing and more actions being planned.
I suspected that was the case. Thank you.
Unless there are any more comments, are we happy to bring this back for another review in 2 years? I'm not sure annual review is necessary, but 2 years seems to me like a good time period. Okay. Yeah. Fine, in which case should we endorse the strategy? Yeah, great, thumbs up. Yeah, excellent, thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you for endorsing it, thank you.
The Isle of Wight, so item 8, Isle of Wight Community Safety Partnership update. I think we've got Colin Rowland on screen to give us a verbal update on that. Mr. Rowland, if you can hear me. If you're talking, you're on mute. I'm not sure how to give a nudge to someone on the screen.
So what I have been told is that it's got to go through Community Safety Partnership first, and it will come back to you in February if that's okay.
Yeah, fine, thank you. I have had that email saying that it should be ready for a February agenda. Yeah, no, thank you very much. It was only intended to be a brief verbal update, but we will see that the real deal, the written document in February. So expect that on our agenda then. Yeah, fine. Thank you, Councillor Lucioni. Item 9, Perpetrator Programme, pages 33 to 82, to consider what's been commissioned, how it will be delivered, and what outcomes are looking to be achieved. Simon Bryant's online and he's magically appeared. Mr. Bryant, over to you to introduce, if you would.
Many thanks, colleagues, and many thanks for letting me join online. I have got some slides, but I think they're in your pack. Do you want us to talk through those quickly, or would you like me to present those?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Apologies, I've got some slides, but they are in your pack. So if you want me to present them, I can, or I can just give you a brief summary for discussion.
I think a brief summary would be great. Thank you. Yeah.
Many thanks. So we have the Isle of Wight Domestic Abuse Service, which the public health team has overseen since 2022, and that has two aspects. One is run by the U Trust, and that's for victims and survivors, and the one we are talking about tonight is run by the Hampton Trust, and it's a service for people using abusive behaviours. We picked this language thinking about a trauma-informed approach and how we really support people and enable people who have got perpetrating behaviours to change. Some of those people will have been convicted, many won't have been. So you've got the figures in your pack with a total of 2,000 domestic abuse flagged crimes recorded on the Isle of Wight, and that's 20% of all police recorded crimes. So it's a significant crime, and we know this is mainly, when thinking about domestic abuse, it's male on female abuse in the main, but not exclusively. So the service is a community-based service with interventions, with assessment of risk, safety and care planning for those victims, because we know that when a perpetrator goes through a service, their victim is at increased risk, so we need to think carefully about that. So we're supporting those partners and ex-partners. We're also doing prevention and awareness raising activities, working with our partners, because we do know that actually it's a difficult issue to raise when you're working with a client or a person in front of you. So we're trying to change that and taking a multi-agency approach to risk management. So working really closely with our children's services colleagues when there's often children involved, and there'll be in children's social care, and our adult social care colleagues. It's a new service. It starts on the 1st of October, which is why we're here at this point with the summary. We're going to come back in March with some more detailed outcomes, but the outcomes we're expecting from the service are increased identification of specialist interventions for those with abusive behaviour, a reduction in repeat use of abusive behaviour. So we see clients going round and round this cycle. So we're trying to reduce that repeat use, increase of safety, and reduction to risk of victims and survivors. There's a number of things we can do in that context, thinking about their health and well-being, and then really thinking about our systems approach to domestic abuse, so how we take a whole systems approach. So in addition to that service, there are a number of other services that are commissioned by the OPCC and our constabulary colleagues. One of those is Project Foundation. So that's about working with the police, identifying those who've had abuse in the family but not being charged. So not everyone is charged, and that might be because the victim doesn't want to press charges or for various reasons. And then there's also Project Cara, which isn't in your pack, which is a conditional caution. So someone who's had a first offence for domestic abuse can go down that route. A little bit, I carefully say, a little bit like the driving course, where if you've got a speeding fine, you can go to a course. So it's much more kind of quick intervention to see if you can change behaviour. So the service starts on the 1st of October, and we commission it in conjunction with the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I see some hands up. Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I was just struck by the significant number of underreporting, and I wondered how that compared to the national average where we're placed.
Very comparable to the national average. We're not unique in that sense, but many of these crimes are underreported for various reasons, including people, victims not wanting to report, and victims being fearful of reporting. So we're trying to do an awful lot of that work to ensure that victims feel able to report, and then actually we can work with those perpetrating the crimes as well.
Just if I may, as a follow-up, I was wondering what initiatives we're undertaking in terms of public education and advertising, as it were, to signpost services, ensure that people are fully apprised of what we can do, which sadly seems limited given the budget constraints. And clearly we need to be doing a lot more, but how can we more effectively signpost?
So we do a lot of work around the kind of public comms, particularly around, we've got the 16 days of action coming up against domestic abuse. So we do some work there, really working really carefully with our partners, particularly children's services and adult services, where they all see domestic abuse in their work, and then how we help people refer. I think an area we need to further increase is our work with the health service. We know that particularly victims will be going to the health service on a number of occasions before they are referred for support, and that's partly because they're the kind of presenting behaviour is not clear, partly because people don't know how to ask. So we're doing a lot of work around awareness raising and skill-based work with our colleagues.
Thank you.
Councillor Downer had his hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Simon. May I ask if there's any statistics with perpetrators? Is that how many years there are sort of statistics with related to drugs and alcohol abuse? And also, if I may, it says about the behaviour change. How do you go about changing somebody's behaviour? Thank you.
You're absolutely right that we know that domestic abuse, both victims and perpetrators, there is an increased use of drugs and alcohol. So we work very closely with our drug and alcohol services because we know, if, excuse me, if we reduce particularly alcohol consumption, that may also and does reduce domestic abuse. So we are kind of working hand in hand, but you're absolutely right. That's a really close correlation. You're right, you know, behaviour change in this client group is very, very difficult. The evidence of what works isn't strong, so we are building on the evidence base to really understand that. But it's about a significant intervention with individuals in both group work and one-to-one to help people recognise the behaviour and then bring in bring in techniques that they can use when they recognise that they're going down that path with their partner. And we do work closely with the police because, of course, this is a crime, and you know, we work closely with the police so that they can convict people as appropriate. But as I said earlier, not every victim wants to press charges, but we still want to enable those perpetrators to change behaviour because we want to reduce domestic abuse on the island.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Redshaw.
Hello, Simon. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Picking up on what Councillor Drew said about low rates of reporting, I just want to ask a question around, out of this programme, what expectations there are on training for the police. So in September, an Isle of Wight police sergeant was found guilty of using excessive force on a woman in custody who had previously experienced domestic violence. Now that's very recent. And examples like that reduce public confidence and trust in the police. And they also deter people from reporting. So I think the public will be interested to know if the council will be asking the police to do more rigorous training and evidencing what they've done. I know we're going to be looking at this again in March. Is that something that you can bring to us then to look at?
So not only do I commission the domestic abuse services, I also chair the domestic abuse partnership, and that's the kind of conversation that we have in that partnership board. It's a new statutory board that the every council has to set up, and I chair it on the island and have done now for just over a year. And you're absolutely right, we need to have a system change so that everyone has confidence in the system, so that victims feel able to go to the police and know that they'll get the right response. So as part of the perpetrator service, there is a kind of whole system around that. But you're right, we need to ensure that the police are able to report, and I will pick that up, take that back to the Domestic Abuse Partnership Board so that we are clear that anyone who is a victim feels able to report that to the police or to work with the agency working with them so that we can reduce abuse in the longer term.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. I know that this is being delivered by the Hampton Trust, and they do deliver training for schools and agencies and organisations. Will they be delivering training for the police?
So it's multi-agency training, so the police are very welcome to attend. I know, and I'm speaking at the edge of my knowledge, the police do have their own courses. So I think what would be helpful is if I go to the police and find out what they're doing internally, but also through both our safeguarding boards, both the adults and children, we do a lot of training on domestic abuse, which is open to all. So I think there's two aspects. So I will make sure that I talk to police colleagues and get that detail, but also share with you the details of the courses that that are open to everybody.
Yeah, some detail on what training the police are doing and the take up and whether or not it's mandatory would be great. Thank you.
Councillor Redrup raises very important questions and almost a bigger issue. I think it's probably too big for what we're dealing with here, which is some of what we hear and see in the news around the Metropolitan Police. Some of the very worrying stories indeed around the treatment of women and ethnic minorities. It does lead one to wonder whether it's identified in the Metropolitan Police because of the greater scrutiny and status they have in this country. And that maybe similar things going on in the regions, for example, Hampshire and Isle of Wight police, that don't get picked up because they don't have that same sort of media scrutiny that the Met has. It's really a comment, but I don't know whether there's anything, Simon, that you wanted to say about that.
Yes. So domestic abuse does form part of that agenda we're talking about now, violence against women and girls, which is wider than domestic abuse. It includes violence in non-home domestic settings. But you're absolutely right. I have talked to the police, and when some of those issues in the Met were first raised, the Chief Constable then brought people together to talk about what they were doing in the police force. I suspect that is questions for them, but you're right, it's a really important issue that we have confidence in our police force, that women feel able to raise concerns, and that it's going to be taken forward appropriately and safely.
Thank you. I've got some hands at the back, but I'm just going to take Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, it'd be just personally, it'd be good to understand a bit more about the preventative activities that are going on. I think what concerns me is the statistics around the age groups that were significantly more likely to be recorded as offenders, and how we sort of stop or quell that pipeline growing.
Yeah.
Are we talking to schools? Yeah.
Very much so. And it what we also need to bring in here is that sexual relationships education is now statutory in schools, and it hasn't been previously. So obviously this is about healthy relationships. And so we're working very closely with our schools and our education colleagues to educate and empower young people to have good relationships, but also recognizing we need our young men to stand up and recognize what's unhealthy and how they kind of challenge each other. I've seen some very interesting work from up north about how young people are designing that. But you're absolutely right. Prevention is what we need to do. And what we found previously, which is why we've changed this service, is that young men, that 18-24, don't come to services to address this kind of behaviour. So we are in this space to really challenge the new service to say this is what we've got to do, and this is our new thinking. So you're right, but that's why we've put that in service specification.
Thank you. I think I saw Councillor Lilly's hand and then Councillor Molster. Councillor Lilly.
Thank you for me allowed to speak. I'm pleased that we're going to have perpetrator programmes, because if people know my record as a councillor, it's something I've been calling for ever since I became a councillor in 2017. And also before my life as a councillor and now as a pensioner, I was actually a designer of the original perpetrator programmes in this country nearly 30 years ago. So I have some knowledge. The particular questions I want to ask Simon is, there's always a problem if people have to travel long distances. As Hampton is on the mainland, are the programmes going to be delivered on the island? That's my first question.
All programmes are on the island for island residents.
Thank you. Two, one of the issues you mentioned about children, is there going to be a relationship with contact centres? Because one of the things that's needed with the programme is that the victims, and in this case the children, are often going to need support whilst the parent perpetrator is on the programme. Is that fully in place?
There's two aspects to that. Yes, absolutely fully part of this programme, but also recognise we have a victim service that goes alongside this, so they can access that as well. So absolutely, victim safety has to be our priority, and it is.
And my last question is, Historically, there's always been difficulties with evaluating these programmes. The quality of the methodology has always been a problem, and I just wondered, how are you going to make the evaluation to give much clearer outcomes? Because often the evaluations of perpetrator programmes do leave questions on outcomes.
Councillor Lilly, you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge. And a couple of years ago, we did some evaluation with Southampton University, and we saw the gaps in what we were measuring and looking to see as outcomes. So yes, we do have service outcomes, but you're right, it's really challenging, particularly if someone then leaves the service, how you follow that up. But we work very closely with the police and use tools in the service, something called a pipit tool, and I can't remember what it's called, but that really measures someone's change in behaviour, so we can see that change. But it's a very difficult service to evaluate, but we are very keen that we monitor this in the long term so that we can see a reduction in domestic abuse on the island.
Thank you. Can I just first to flag up that one of the problems of evaluation is that perpetrators go on to another victim, and often you don't pick that up. So they've actually improved their behaviour with the first victim, but suddenly there is a behaviour you don't know about with the second victim, or third, fourth.
Absolutely. See, one of the measures is reduction in repeat abusive behaviours, not just in one relationship, but in all relationships. You're right, it's very challenging, and it's about personal privacy as well, but you're right, we do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Mosdar.
Thank you. I'm sort of sat in the back seat. Would Councillor Redrup, if she's on the committee, like to ask her question before I ask mine?
Councillor Redrup.
Mine kind of follows on from that about metrics and assessments and what information we have to see whether or not these services are working. I know it's early days, which is why the presentation and the information you supplied to us is quite limited, so there's not a lot of data there to look at. But I was wondering what kind of data do you anticipate be able to give us in the future for us to assess if this is working, and will that report on the efficiency of it be available to the public?
So the second question, some will, but we've got to be careful what we put in the public domain, bearing in mind the kind of work we're doing. But yes, much of the data we have would be available to the public if it's readily available from the service and it's appropriate to share. I'll be sharing with this committee things like the number of people in the service, the number of people who've improved or changed their behaviour, the multi-agency response, so that'd be how many other partners are involved, and thinking about the number of people going through those programmes and those outcomes. We are trying, as Councillor Lilly quite rightly raised, thinking about the evidence-based programmes. The evidence is weaker than we'd like, so how do we kind of carry on evaluating that programme, but also recognising, apologies, I can't remember who raised that, but the age group. So we're really closely monitoring the age groups of people, mainly males, going through these programmes so that we can match that against the need. So we'll be doing that as well. And through our domestic abuse partnership, we look at data across the system. So we look at police data, we look at the service data, and we look at other partners' system data so that we can bring through a whole picture of work so that we really understand as a domestic abuse partnership where we need to focus our efforts. And that data includes data from the victim voice so that we really hear what's changing and what's working.
And I just wanted to say to ask, so of that, the data that comes from the partnership, does the partnership produce reports that the public can see?
That's a very good question. We haven't to date because we're working through that. I think I can talk to colleagues. We can find an appropriate place. I think it might be the Community Safety Partnership that would receive that. But when we come back to this committee, we will produce a report for the committee to see, and we can work through going forward what the most appropriate information to share and what you're receiving, and develop that as we go. As I said, it's a new service, so let's work on that together.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mosdar.
Thank you. Simon, I just want to ask, I personally don't think we've ever done enough in this country to raise enough awareness on the damage of mental abuse. We talk about domestic abuse a huge amount, and you talk about teaching in schools about healthy relationships. But I don't think there is a generation of men and women who don't actually understand what a mentally abusive relationship is. And I just wonder what we'll be doing to make sure that we raise that awareness, that people actually realise that the mental abuse that they are getting. You know, we know this can lead to suicide, etc. You know, it can have such a horrendous effect without ever actually leaving a bruise on someone. So how are we going to raise awareness, and how are we going to educate people who aren't having that education in schools, that don't realise what a healthy relationship is?
Really good point, Councillor Morsdale. So for me, I hope I haven't slipped into the language of domestic violence, which is what was called before, because you're right, that really focused on physical hurt. We're absolutely thinking about domestic abuse in the rounds. That includes coercive control, mental abuse as well. So yes, we are there, but you're right, it's really difficult. And how do we raise that with our young people? So that does fit into that programme of work we do around supporting young people to understand healthy relationships, not, you know, in the broadest sense, and actually what is a healthy relationship? How do you have a good conversation with the person in a relationship with? But it's a societal change, and I'm always hopeful that our domestic abuse partnership can make a difference, and we come together and show that we can really change our culture on the, you know, in the country, and in this case on the island, to improve relationships, so that actually we can, in my hope, eradicate domestic abuse. I live in hope.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to pick one quick thing that you said, that, you know, educating young people. Actually, we could talk a relationship of someone who is 60 years old and actually doesn't realise that they're living in a mentally abusive relationship, and because they've been living in that relationship for years and years and years, that you know, they've probably lost themselves within it. That's what I'm trying to say, is that there is a gap of people that don't realise that, you know, the mental abuse that they're receiving is not right, and there is a life outside it. That's the bit I want raised awareness on.
Absolutely right, and I think I can see the Director of Adult Services in the room. You know, work closely with Director of Adult Services, because they'll be picking up some of those clients. So how do we make sure that's part of all our thinking?
Thank you very much. Is there anything else from councillors? Councillor Lever.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, Simon, just a quick one from me. Just looking at the age groups that are noted here, and the percentage of people carrying out domestic abuse related crimes were men, it's 69%. That's overall. But in terms of those age groupings we've got, does that percentage stabilise across those age groupings, or is there a trend towards?
So all I can say, because I can find out from my colleagues, but those age groups we've identified are the ones with the highest amount of domestic abuse in those age groups. So I guess saying, is it stabilised? I guess if you're saying 69% of people carrying out crimes were men, in that age groups they are probably higher, because if we then average out all ages. But taking Councillor Morsdale's point, there, you know, some people would be much older, and that'll be, you know, when we get into all sorts of different kind of areas of work. So they need a little bit of thinking, and we've worked with Age Concern, thinking about the elder people in older relationships. So I can find out that information and come back to you, probably if we give that all data in March, and we can have a really comprehensive picture then.
Yes, sorry, Simon. I think I'm not sure if I explained it too well.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. No, I appreciate that answer as well. I was thinking more so if, for instance, 18 to 24-year-olds, is it still around 69% were men, or is it higher or lower? I'm thinking about the age groups in particular.
No, so in all those age groups, it's around 69% are male. So we know that most abuse is perpetrated by males, and mainly on females. But there is, in domestic abuse, we are seeing more same-sex domestic abuse as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. It's more a general comment, I suppose, as opposed to a question, but I was just ruminating on what Councillor Morsdale was saying. I think everybody appreciates that a particularly pernicious, intractable problem is financial coercive control. I'm always shocked, actually, by the lack of action on the part of the government when it comes, for example, to benefits and such that often a partner's income is taken into account in relation to the calculation, which would obviously create yet another barrier potentially for someone not to leave a coercive relationship. I was just wondering, to the extent that we are able to, and I'm presuming that it's not currently the case in relation to council tax reduction, and the way in which the criteria for that as a single person discount, such that we would be able to potentially help in some way ameliorate or remove that barrier by allowing potentially being of.
Oh, you've cut out there.
Potentially being a victim of coercive control to passport someone to a greater degree of council tax reduction on the island, whether that's something that's been explored, if it's even possible. As I say, it's just occurred to me as Councillor Mosdale and Councillor Redrup were speaking.
It's a really good point. It's not something I've come across, but all I can say is our domestic abuse victim services are really innovative in the way they support victims. And I think, looking with council officer colleagues, if there's something we need to do to protect a victim, we would do all we could in our powers to ensure that that victim is able to move on into safe accommodation, whether that's via refuge and then, the next stage. And we're looking at, different models of safe accommodation, because refuge doesn't suit everybody. So we're looking at all those things. And I will, again, as through the partnership, we can pick up those kind of points.
Councillor Redrup.
Hello, Simon. Sorry, another question for me
Not at all.
on data and information. Just listening to what we've been talking about, some of the questions about who the perpetrators are and who the victims are. I think it'd be really useful if we were to get, I know there's been a needs assessment done before this work was commissioned. I think it'd be really useful for the committee if we were able to see a copy of that needs assessment, so we can assess any information that comes to us in the future to see if it's been successful. That be possible?
I think that'd be really helpful. I think obviously this was a presentation that's asked for, and we pulled this together on the new service. But I think in March, with permission of the chair, if we do a kind of a larger item on domestic abuse in general to show the data, what our services are, it might be helpful if we also have police colleagues around that conversation, so that we join that up together and ensure that we have a rounded conversation around domestic abuse, so that we understand the whole situation and what we're trying to do, and we ensure we move that conversation forward. But I'm really pleased to talk about it, because actually it's raising this agenda. We've had a really, I think, a helpful conversation, and we've certainly talked about some really important issues that haven't been raised previously. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'd be very beneficial in March. Unless there are any other questions, thank you very much indeed, Simon. I think that was a particularly useful exchange and discussion, and I look forward to March. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item number 10, quarterly performance monitoring report. We had some discussion on this in relation to budget under item 11, which was dealt with earlier, but that report, I've got a few comments, but councillors, is there anything you wanted to raise? Councillor Quirk.
First on page 86, just to show that I do read the reports, it says that the number is slightly lower than the same period last year. Actually, it's 141 higher, but that's not my comment. If you go to page 100, it says that we've got a current demand for disabled facilities grants of 3.3 million. It's going to be 4 million by the end of the year, but we've reduced the budget to 1.8 million. That doesn't seem to be good financial management. Maybe someone would like to explain it to me.
Thank you. Laura Gordian, someone needs to chuck her a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and I promise not to sit at the back next time. It's been ever so inconvenient. I have recently taken over the lead for Disabled Facilities Grant, and it's a really valuable question because it's one that I asked at the same time. In terms of the allocation of funding, the Disabled Facilities Grant is determined at a central government level and comes to us. We then spend it as we need to spend it based on eligibility and on need. In year for the last 5 years, the spend on DFGs has not exceeded 1.8 million. The commitments run over multiple financial years. So the demand that you're seeing in the report is reflective of multiple financial years rather than the one we're currently in, where the budget is 1.8 million pounds.
I get that it's over a number of years, but does this actually relate to this financial year?
The 1.8.
The numbers that are shown, it sort of infers that it's in the current budget. But if it's spread over a number of years, maybe it's just not worded as clearly as it could be. But that's the issue. So it's not that we're going to suddenly find that we've got another 2.2 million pounds we've got to find. This is actually over the type. Okay.
Just to confirm, I'm sat here nodding. In terms of the budget, some is commitment that was made in last financial year where works weren't undertaken, so it rolls over, as does the money allocated to it. And some is for works in the next financial year where the budget will be the new budget for 24-25. So it's a challenge in terms of reporting based on when the applications are received, but when works can be scheduled and can be undertaken. And the process itself is not the most straightforward, something I hope to be able to resolve for local residents.
Maybe a little bit more attention to the detail of the wording next year.
Anything else? I'll make a comment while councillors are looking, or a question really, on fly tipping, pages 127 to 128. So we've got data for example, the month of September over the last 3 years. The number of fly tip incidents seem to be increasing. I think 290 in September, but the number of fly tip actions over the page on 128 seem to be going down. Only 7 as compared to 43 2 years ago. I'm not sure who there is here to field that question, but my question is, why, when fly tipping incidents are increasing, are the number of actions taken decreasing?
Answer that, Chair, but I can make a comment because I asked a similar question and was confused with perhaps your idea of what fly tipping is. Fly tipping includes people who put out their rubbish on the wrong day. So that's including the fly tipping data. So if somebody put out a black bag on a recycling day, that would be classed as fly tipping. But I can't give any more information than that, Chair.
Yeah, that seems rather odd. Do you happen to know whether that's a reclassification of fly tipping in recent years, or has that always been the case? I mean, I think most members of the public would find it slightly odd that putting out your black bag on the wrong day would be fly tipping. Okay, Councillor Jones-Evans.
If I could help, I mean, and perhaps Councillor Jordan will confirm this or not, but a lot of us use the app for Fix My Street, and on there, say there has been black bags left out on the wrong day or not picked up, whatever, you can go on there and report it as fly tipping. So it could be just simple as that. So I had an incident in my ward where it's being used a lot. We've been using the app a hell of a lot. So I'm not claiming I'm totally responsible for that raise there, but we have actually managed, with the help of all of the teams in waste, managed to sort that one out. Yeah, but I think that's right, isn't it? On that Fix My Street, there is, if you have a black bag, it gets done as fly tipping.
Yeah, thank you. I think, so councillor Mosel?
Thank you. I know what Andrew Garrett would say if he was here. Why aren't we having clean data? So these reports can only be as relevant as clean as the data can be, can't they? So when you ask those questions, which is, which is understandable why it can cause confusion and everybody can, can get that. What's been done to action that data in future will be clean and understandable when it comes here? Hello, Colin.
I'm going to, so the leader's got his hand up, and then I'm going to go to Colin Rowland on screen.
Please allow the director to speak if he can.
Fine, thank you. Colin Rowland. Thank you.
Yes, I think there does need to be a little bit more clarity around that answer. But the fact is that fly tipping does include waste that's not collected.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose, genuine question as to, I take September as an example, why 2 years ago there were 43 actions taken, and this year in September only 7 actions. I take the point that, what is an action, and it could be various different things. But it's quite hard to, scrutinize those columns. The first reaction is action is decreasing. And without explanation behind why that's happening, it's very hard for us to really pass comment. But maybe is that something we could deal with in a written question from me?
Clean the data.
Yes, we'll take that away, Chairman, and come back with some more detailed information for the next meeting.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Quirk.
On page 112, we have the goes over the pages. So it starts on 111. Percentage of care leavers in education, employment, and training, and that seems to have gone down a bit. And the percentage of post-18 not in education, employment, or training seems to have gone up a bit. It sort of seems to be going in the wrong direction. Anything that we're doing to try and put it right?
The room is a little more bare than it was at the beginning of the meeting, so I'm not too sure where we direct that.
Can we provide more written data on that one for you as well, please, Chair?
Thank you. I appreciate we're dotting around a bit, but I've got another question based on 128. So it's the narrative section, 3rd paragraph. It says that additional CCTV network coverage requested by community safety and the police was supplied by Ireland Roads and was in place over the summer. It doesn't go on to say whether that was successful or what the outcomes from that was. I think that would be helpful to understand. Can I add that to written request? I think it'd be just interesting to see what the results of that was. Anything else? Actually, there is one more thing for me. I can't recall where I saw it, but it's reference to a parking strategy, which I've seen before. I wonder where we are with a parking strategy. And I think with particular interest, because there are some reports that the parking permits, etc., haven't brought in the income that they were expected to. I would have thought the parking strategy would sweep that up. Do we have a timeline on when we might get one?
It was always in the corporate plan for 2024, Chair. And so that's still our intention is to commence that work in next year in 2024.
Would that be expected for around May 24, around annual council, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. That depends. You'll probably be aware that parking is a huge issue to deal with. I suspect it will take a little longer than 4 or 5 months, Chair.
Thank you. unless there's anything else. And we're happy to identify those 3 or 4 written questions for a response. Yeah, Councillor Jones
On
Evans.
that fly tipping thing, go on, look at page 128, so that you just picked up on the CCTV question. It talks about actions as investigations. 7 investigations were carried out. So that says to me, actions aren't just about going and picking up. It's actually doing the due diligence and finding out who's done the work. That's what it looks like to me from that report. Not my portfolio, but just from my knowledge of the things I have to deal with in my ward. That's what that says to me.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I just don't understand why it's gone down when the amount of fly tipping has gone up. And there may be an explanation, but I'd like to see it.
It's probably evidence, isn't it? Evidence
it could be.
to do an investigation.
Councillor Jones Evans, it could
It's
be.
not my portfolio. I just thought it'd be helpful.
Yeah, it could be probably a number of things, but I'd like to know what it actually is, if indeed we do know, if we know at all. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to item 12, members' question time. Yes, hands at the back. Councillor Mosdell.
Mine up first. So I have 2 questions. Firstly is read in a recent article that there's been some funding from government for swimming pools, and that was allocated to Medina and to the Heights. My question is, when there was clearly a grant that was applied for that, was there a reason why the 2 community pools weren't included in that? Was it part of the government funding that had to be for councils? And I did hear a statement saying that that would help towards one leisure, but can we ascertain this is merely for swimming pools? Is that okay?
Councillor Jones Evans.
Thank you.
It is my portfolio. Be pleased. I've sat here all afternoon.
Yeah,
waiting
you
for a
knew you
question
wanted a
on my
question
portfolio.
from
I'm here
me.
now. Yeah. So, so the question is, yes, we were applying for community pools as well as our own. We did put a bid in for the one at the waterside pool in Ryde. The evidence we had, I don't think, was substantial enough to be successful for them. West Wight decided not to ask us, well, sorry, didn't ask us to, but they came to the conclusion that they wouldn't be eligible because they have quite a good long-standing tariff for their energy, because it's literally just about energy use and extra chemicals and things like that. So they decided not to be part of this. So we put in for the 3 swimming pools, so Medina and Heights and the and Waterside. So yes, we did, and that was the result. Just those 2 pools that we got. But we're very lucky because we got the maximum available, which was fantastic. And just to let you know, there is a second application, which is for capital works, and all 4 pools have gone into that bid as well.
Perfect. Can I just ask a supplementary to that? Does that mean that the West Wight pool then are better at sourcing a good energy supply than we are as a council?
I think it's to do with when they fixed it. When they fix it, it's like, you know, if your domestic one, you might have fixed it for three years. So it's just luck of the draw, really. Unfortunately, you know, we're in a pretty terrible economic situation at the minute, so it's affecting a lot of people.
I think West Wight will probably say that that's a skill set rather than a luck of the draw, watching the fuel markets and stuff like that. But
no, well, the information I've got is that they have an outstanding deal. So that's all I can say. I can't comment anymore. I don't have the information.
That was the 2 things I wanted to know. And then I have one other question for Councillor Lilly, because I did put my hand up first. Thank you for letting me attend this meeting and ask questions, and I'm allowed to now because it's members' questions. One thing I was quite concerned about is the corporate scrutiny always used to be so we could actually look at the agenda of what was happening at cabinet as well, so that it gave all councillors a chance to ask what was on the cabinet paper. So I can see that we've discussed the quarterly report and stuff like that. We haven't had an opportunity at the scrutiny meeting to discuss a report of the Cabinet Member for Children's Services on the amalgam of Chiltern and Rookley. So I assume there must be a reason why that's not on this agenda. And also there is a report of the Cabinet Member for Housing and Finance regarding local council tax report. That isn't on this agenda either. Could I just know the reasons for that, please? Because they are 2 subjects that do fascinate me.
I mean, very simple answer is the schools question is it's the competence of children's services.
No, that isn't my question. My question is, in the past, it's always been a really good opportunity for Cabinet in an environment like this to actually have some questions put of them of what is on their Cabinet agenda. And what I'm saying is, on the scrutiny agenda, there are some items missing that are coming to Cabinet on Thursday. I just wondered why they weren't quite two big subjects. The council tax support, because it's not running sequentially on this agenda.
Yes, so at the beginning, I think, of this council term, I'm not sure how it happened, but it did seem that Cabinet agenda was corporate scrutiny's agenda. And this committee took the view, I think led by Councillor Quirk, that that wasn't the best way of dealing with scrutiny, that this committee would have, you know, the authority, it already has the authority, would take the practical decisions about what we put on our agenda. So that's why we look at the forward plan and the progress update and the work plan at the beginning of the meeting. We have already discussed Chillerton and Rookley in this committee, I think, twice over the last year and a half, and wouldn't have sought to take that today because of the competence of Children's Services.
I will go to Cabinet and find out about the local council tax support. I'm sure Councillor Jordan can't wait for that.
Councillor Lilly, you had your hand up.
Yes. Before I start to answer my written questions, which was actually submitted to this committee within the appropriate time, I would actually say, as a ward councillor that has one of those community swimming pools, Waterside, I have actually taken the asked questions to council officers, and particularly I've written to Bob Seeley to take up, because that is a very important community facility in Ryde, and also is part of the flood area that has recently been severely flooded. But I'll go on to my particular question. Basically, in light of the recent flooding in Ryde and across the island, there appears to be evidence of poor communication between the agencies, particularly Environment Agency, Southern Water, Island Roads, Isle of Wight Council and Parish and Town Council, Emergency Service and other stakeholders. This has left residents, including my residents in Ryde, Apley and Elmfield ward and the neighbouring ward of Ryde, Monkton, Mead, being directly flooded, feeling not listened to, abandoned, angry, and in their eyes unsupported. And I actually, although I accept there needs to be time to have a report, and you've put that on your agenda at future meeting, I thought it was important at this meeting that my residents did have an advocate who was putting their views forward, because they are extremely angry. So the four questions I put forward: who is responsible corporately overall for such a crisis on the Isle of Wight? And what is Isle of Wight Council as a unitary authority doing about improving communication, particularly in short term, and how are they communicating to the public, especially those who do not have benefit of internet? Note, most of the flooded households actually lost their internet. Please note, a huge amount of internet online information was sent out, often after the event. If you didn't pick it up online, you would have not known. 2, what is the current emergency plan where that agencies were following, and can this plan be made available? Was it followed? 3, post-COVID-19, all parish and town councils alongside Isle of Wight Council had resilience and crisis emergency plans in place. This included flooding. There is one at Ryde Town Council. Why hasn't Isle of Wight Council fully recognised these plans alongside their emergency plans? And why was there an observed lack of leading coordinating body bringing all the agencies together in a joined up and coordinated way? And my last one was, what is Isle of Wight Council doing to get help out to people in need of support due to the flooding now, when it actually matters? You've still got many people living in hotels, many living with family. I do thank the Isle of Wight Council for giving temporary accommodation to families, particularly ones who did not have insurance. But people are feeling very, very traumatized and having to pick up, especially as it's difficult to get builders. It's likely that some people will not have their houses livable for at least 6 months, if not to a year. So I mean, we do need to have a package of that. And I do actually thank Colin Rowland and Tash Dix for actually having a meeting with me and Rye councillors yesterday. And I do know they were visiting the site and talking to residents today. But that is 8 days after the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. I was told there might be a short verbal update from the leader, followed by a written response.
Thank you, Chair. So I have written a few words, so just bear with me. It's just a few words, Chair. And I appreciate that everyone affected in their homes and businesses will have questions, and communities will want to tell their stories as well. However, the council will need to investigate. I referred to this earlier about section 19, gather evidence and prepare a full, honest and open report, which I will commit to bring to scrutiny at the earliest opportunity. The councils of the local flood risk authority will be preparing an investigation and flood report regarding all communities impacted, and will be engaging with all affected residents and stakeholders. And in the meantime, as you referred to, Chair, and thank you, a fuller written response. It's quite lengthy. The questions were quite lengthy. The response will be quite lengthy. Will be provided after this meeting. It will be published, and it will be obviously sent to Councillor Lilly and other members.
Thank you. I just very briefly on the flooding. I think there's an awful lot that could be asked and said, and deserves to be residents deserve to be responded to on it. I think, as I said earlier, Section 19 flood report, having seen one in my own ward in Bembridge 2 years ago, was a very useful exercise. But in relation to that, and I think the Monkton Mead Section 19 flood report done 2 years ago, both in relation to Bembridge and Monkton Mead, not a penny has been spent on dealing with the outcomes of those reports done 2 years ago. And I think residents might feel a little frustrated that a flood report 2 years ago hasn't been delivered, and that a new one is going to say similar things. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have a flood report. Clearly, the council has got to do one of those. But I think there are things in the interim and answers around very deep, very specific questions in specific communities that can be dealt with. And I think that's what that's why I intend this committee can help with in January, is to allow a forum for any interim views, outcomes, assessments, ideas, not only from the council, but from the other organisations. And it perhaps gives them an opportunity to communicate if that's what they want to do. If they choose not to, then that's clearly a matter for them. And the public will draw their own conclusions if we can't get those agencies in front of this scrutiny meeting in January. Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. And I think what my questions are kind of followed on from that is because there's a lot of areas affected by the flooding, and I just want to make sure that we're not. I appreciate the questions that Councillor Lilly's asking. A few people, other councillors are asking similar questions, and I just want to make sure that we're not. It's not very. The approach isn't sporadic about how we get answers for these things. So is the best place for all councillors to feed into any questions and feed into reports? Is that the January meeting the best? Is that the best opportunity to do that, or are there other processes where we can do that?
I mean, my view is the Section 19 flood reports are a statutory thing and will take on a formal life of their own. My own experience of it is the communities are communicated with and they can provide evidence, and there's an email address for people to send evidence. I see this committee's role as being able to provide some sort of summary scrutiny of any early information to the extent we're able to. I've got Wendy Pereira.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's the start of the Section 19 process is a call for evidence. So that gives, I think that gives you two opportunities. It gives you an opportunity when you discuss flooding here at corporate scrutiny to ask some specific questions that you want those reports to ask, as well as then through that call for evidence, additional information and questions being raised and evidence being provided.
And I would think because this committee is cross-party, I think it's a good opportunity to ask some really genuinely useful questions on an all-councillor basis. Sorry, Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Wendy, for the response. And a follow-up to that is, obviously, the government announced a block of funding to be distributed to people affected. Have we had any confirmation from government about how we distribute that yet?
Wendy.
I think you've hit a question which I am extremely frustrated about. When the flood recovery grant was originally announced, it was as a flood recovery grant will be available. As we got post the flood incident, it became a flood recovery grant will be available to eligible local authorities. At no stage have the eligibility criteria been formally sent out to local authorities. And every day since that day, we have been asking for information about what makes an area eligible and providing data on the number of properties that have been affected on the island and the times over which they were affected. And as yet, we still have not had confirmation that we are going to receive flood recovery grant. But it is an absolute priority for this council, through myself, through the leader and through the MP, to keep pushing to make sure that we do get an allocation through that grant.
That was going to be my small follow-up, is the MP doing anything to chase that? Okay, right, great.
Thank you. Councillor Lilly, briefly, if I may, any
When you have your meeting, I think it's important that there is the senior member from Southern Water and the Environment Agency, because there is a lot of questions from them. We cannot separate the flooding from the fact that sewage overflow were actually coming out of Apley pumping station every night for nearly 10 nights prior and during that, and you could see it floating into people's houses, right? So we do need to ask that, those questions and have them together. Thank you.
If there are no more probably the last question, Councillor Mosdale.
Sorry, it's not my question. I got asked to read a question, so it's a councillor's question. At a previous meeting, it was noted that public and member questions under the respective agenda items should be noted in the minutes and on the website together with their respective answers, verbal or written. Can we note that this agreement was made and also passed the same recommendation to Cabinet, full council and other public committees? That was the question.
Sorry, this minuting all
So
responses to questions.
Yeah, it's to minute both the written, so not just to put the questions, but to ensure that on the website and in the minutes is the answers, to relevant answers to those questions. I wasn't there, I'm just reading it.
I may refer that across to the monitoring officer if he's happy to take the question. I mean, if he's not, I think it's a substantial question we need to maybe discuss and debate rather than make a decision now. But And Chris, is there anything you can say?
Yes,
on that?
thank you, Chairman. Obviously, under the existing constitution, provision is obviously made in terms of questions by members and members of the public. And just quickly, looking at one aspect in terms of questions by members, it talks about a record of written questions, and it goes on just very briefly, words to the effect, following the meeting, the answer will be recorded adjacent to the question in an electronic file. Minutes of the meeting will record who asked a question, subject matter and the reference number, question and answer. In other words, there'll be a way of seeing what the answers to the questions were, etc. And it's certainly something we can take away and just check to see how it's been dealt with and if there are any improvements which can be made.
Wendy Pereira.
I think the implication of that is whilst the written questions themselves get recorded in the minutes and the answers are then published and available to view online, it's the verbal questions that probably need the follow up on in terms of how they're recorded in the minutes and how the answer is recorded as well.
Yeah. Can we go away and have a look at that and provide a response at the next meeting? I know it's not necessarily the solution, but these meetings are online, recorded online and available at YouTube. So you could refresh your memory of an oral answer that way. Thank you. Any more questions? No, it's been a longer meeting, but I think there are a number of really important items, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's attended, including cabinet members who didn't necessarily have anything on the agenda. Thank you.